Hello everyone, Banny Banerjee. So who am I? That's the first slide. So I head the design program at Stanford. Some of you might have heard of the D School. It's an institute that we run out of Stanford, which is a cross-disciplinary institute. I can speak more about it. I'm also the director of the Design for Change Center. It's a center where we're looking at what are mechanisms of change, what are mechanisms of diffusion, and how does design play in that space. And I'm an associate professor in the mechanical engineering department at Stanford. So a framing question, why? This is why. There's a big difference between systems that have negative feedback loops that tend to equilibrate and systems that the feedback loops are such that they're getting worse and infinitely worse with a lot of turbulence. And my argument is that most of our ways of thinking, most of our fields, the way that we've geared ourselves and the ways we make decisions are geared with the assumptions of systems of the former sort, except that what we are seeing right now, both in business and much more importantly the environment, is one of the latter kind. And this is not a case of a fire under our chair, it's the whole house burning. And we need to respond to it very, very quickly. So we need to create new methods. So what I'm up to at Stanford is trying to create transdisciplinary and trans-agency co-creation. And the difference between the word multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary is that multidisciplinary is a bunch of people sitting around the room agreeing to agree, whereas transdisciplinary is the creation of new epistemologies, a little bit like a game of soccer, where there's a larger goal of scoring goals and blocking goals, and everybody's moving at the same time and passing the ball back and forth, and the person who shoots with his right foot better is in the place where he's a right, outside right, and people are doing their best in what they do. So there's co-creation among design teams, of course. That's something which we've all experienced. This is something I think we understand. And then there is co-creation among different stakeholders in a space, in a given space. All the partners who are invested in that space. Transdisciplinary is a much trickier thing, but it has great promise. And I think that this is something we need to do because no one discipline is really geared for the kind of challenges that we are looking at. Trans-agency is something that is very interesting, where it's not just disciplines, but you're trying to create a way in which government bodies, policymakers, venture capitalists, non-profits, academics, change agents of any sort are working in some kind of a coherent choreography, if you might say. And then, of course, this question of how do you create where you're not an agent on the outside dishing out a result to the person who are then going to be subject to it or going to carry it forward, but they're a part of a larger, the act of creation itself. So one thing I've come to a conclusion of is that design thinking has a tremendous amount to offer. I have, this is empirical, it's fairly early, but there is a sense that I have from working with different disciplines that the ways we work, because of the completely different cognitive styles that we use and the process which we use has a way of quickly transforming other fields as well. But we have a lot to learn. There are, we've come into a position of limelight for being able to come up with strategies, and we've grown very quickly, but there are lots of fault lines, lots of gaps which we have to fill very, very quickly, so our field needs to gear itself to grow and to fill those gaps. And this is very hard. It's very promising in terms of the results, but it's very, very difficult, and it needs a process of its own. Just as you wouldn't set a designer in designing a very complex system, and assume that they'd be able to do it, transdisciplinary mechanisms aren't easily pulled off either. So a few questions. So how can we, as a design field, shift our focus from the elegance of a system, which we tend to obsess about, and worry about other things, such as impact and the nature of the impact, and also how quickly that effect is going to diffuse. And if we worry about diffusion, what are diffusion mechanisms for co-creation itself? How is an organization that has set itself up for its entire history to almost, systematically disincentivize innovation or co-creation? There are very deep implications about how do we go about doing it. And what are some immediate enabling requirements that we need? What are the things that we need to have in place as prerequisites for this to work in the first place? And what are some key footholds? If we look at it in terms of if you're moving a rock and we have a large lever, where should we place it? And which way should we push? And where should we grasp the lever? And what if this all works out, and we're trying to change the ways organizations work and these multidisciplinary organizations work and so on, what does it look like? Can we visualize what it looks like? And what are the new rules of the game then? And what are heuristics? Because there are design is extremely guilty of reinventing the wheel over and over. We're so in love with the one-offs that we don't have a way of extracting universal and repeatable values out of it. And this whole thing of heuristics, of tracking what works, what doesn't, and how do you go smack into where the rubber hits the road with some degree of efficacy. So those are my questions. Thank you. I hope I stuck to under 5 minutes.